Rainwater ran through the broken doorstep as Zuri dropped to her knees beside the half-conscious beggar sprawled outside her house. Blood mixed with mud on his torn shirt. Her 5-year-old daughter Amina stood frozen behind her, then suddenly whispered, "Mama, why do his eyes look like mine?" The man tried to speak, but only one name came out. Ekon. Neighbors shouted for Zuri to leave him there. A stranger, a danger, a problem meant for somebody else. But when Amina rushed forward and clung to the man as if she had known him all her life, Zuri felt something colder than fear move through her chest. Because in that instant, the beggar on her doorstep did not feel like a stranger at all. Before we go on, tell me this: if a wounded stranger collapsed at your door, would you let him in or protect your family and turn away? And where are you watching from today? Drop your country and local time in the comments. If you love emotional stories filled with shocking twists, deep family secrets, justice, and healing, subscribe and stay with me. Morning arrived slowly in the workers' quarter, not with peace but with noise. Metal buckets scraped across concrete. Women argued over water at the communal pump. A motorcycle coughed twice before roaring to life. Somewhere nearby a baby cried, then a radio blasted a preacher's voice through cheap speakers. The whole neighborhood was already awake when Zuri opened her eyes and remembered in one sharp breath that a strange man was sleeping in her house. For one wild second, she almost thought the night before had been a fever dream. The storm, the blood, the little body of Amina rushing toward a beggar as if pulled by an invisible thread. Then she turned her head and saw him. Ekon was lying on the thin mat near the wall, one arm across his chest, his breathing deeper now. In the daylight he looked less like a threat, and more like a man who had been broken by something larger than hunger. His beard was uneven, his shirt was badly torn. One side of his face was bruised yellow and purple beneath the skin. But there was something else, too, something that made Zuri uneasy in a way she could not explain. Even in sleep, he did not look careless. His posture was controlled. His hands, though roughened by dust and cuts, did not move like the hands of a man born to the streets. There was discipline in the way he rested, as if his body had once belonged to rooms where people sat straight, spoke carefully, and were listened to. Zuri rose quietly from her mattress and wrapped a faded shawl around her shoulders. She found Amina already awake, sitting cross-legged near the doorway, staring at Ekon with the shameless concentration only a child could sustain. Amina, Zuri whispered, "Why are you sitting there like that?" The little girl did not look away. "I want to know when he opens his eyes." Zuri frowned. Why Amina finally turned toward her, serious beyond her years. Because sad people look different when they wake up. That answer landed in Zuri's chest harder than it should have. Before she could respond, Ekon stirred. His eyes opened sharply, not lazily, not with the confusion of someone in a stranger's house, but with instant alertness. He sat up too fast, winced, and reached instinctively toward his ribs. His gaze moved across the room in one sweep: the door, the window, the cooking corner, the child, then Zuri. He assessed everything in less than 2 seconds. Then his face softened. "You let me stay," he said, his voice hoarse. Zuri folded her arms, only until the rain stopped. "You lost a lot of blood." He looked down at the bandage she had wrapped around his side using one of her old cloths. "You cleaned the wound. I did what I could." He gave a small nod, almost formal. "Thank you." That word again. Not the careless thanks of a man used to asking for scraps. Not the overly humble tone of a desperate stranger. It was clean-measured, almost old-fashioned. Zuri noticed Amina inching closer. "You should not sit up too fast," the child told him as if she were the adult. "Mama says people faint twice when they think they are strong." For the first time, a faint smile touched his mouth. "Your mother sounds wise." "She is Amina," said proudly. Zuri turned away before either of them could see the expression that crossed her face. She moved to the small stove and lit the flame beneath a dented kettle. There was not much in the house. A handful of maize meal, 2 onions, a little tea. Half a loaf of bread she had planned to stretch through the day. But hunger had never managed to kill the part of her that could not ignore suffering, even when suffering walked in wearing danger. "You can eat," she said after a moment. "Then you go." Akon lowered his gaze. "That is fair." But as she handed him the chipped cup of tea and a piece of bread, she noticed something strange again. He took the cup with care, not greed. He waited until Amina had her portion before touching his own, and before eating he murmured something under his breath. Not loudly, not for show. A habit. A man trained by another life. Zuri sat across from him on a low stool. "Where are you from?" He swallowed. "I don't know." "You remember your name?" "Only that." "Family," he hesitated. Nothing clear. "Work." His eyes darkened with frustration. "Nothing." She watched him carefully. People lied to survive. She knew that. But confusion had a texture, and his looked real. Outside voices drifted closer. Then came a loud knock against the metal frame of her door. Before Zuri could move, the curtain was shoved aside, and her neighbor Mama Sadeh leaned in without permission. Mama Sadeh was a large woman with hard eyes and a harder tongue. She sold fried fish on the corner and collected gossip the way other people collected coins. Her gaze landed on Akon and sharpened immediately. "So he is still here," she said. Zuri exhaled slowly. "Good morning to you too. I told you last night not to bring him inside." Mama Sadeh stepped fully into the room, hands on hips. "These men pretend to be weak, then they rob you while you sleep." Akon started to rise. "Stay down," Zuri said. Mama Sadeh snorted. "You are protecting him already. I am being decent. Decent women get buried early in places like this." Amina frowned. "Mama Sadeh, you are being rude." The older woman clicked her tongue. "See, the child is already defending him." Akon lowered his eyes. "You are right to be cautious. I will leave after I eat." Mama Sadeh stared at him, thrown off for a moment by the calmness of his tone. Then she leaned closer to Zuri and lowered her voice, though not enough to keep the others from hearing. "Your landlord came earlier. He said if you don't pay by tomorrow night, he will throw your things into the road." Zuri's jaw tightened. Amina looked down at her bread. Mama Sadeh glanced at Akon again, making sure the cruelty landed. "You cannot even carry your own burdens, and now you have brought another one into this house." She left as abruptly as she had entered. Silence remained behind her. For a few seconds only the kettle hissed. Akon set down the cup. "I should go now." "Yes," Zuri said quickly. Too quickly. Then, after a pause, "Can you even walk?" He tested his side, stood carefully, and swayed for half a second before steadying himself. "I can." But when he reached the doorway, Amina rushed after him. "No." Both adults looked at her. She planted herself in front of him, chin lifted stubbornly. "You can't go if you're still broken," Amina Zuri warned. But Akon did something unexpected. He crouched, despite the pain, until he was level with the child. Sometimes people still have to go when they are broken. Amina studied him with solemn eyes. "That is sad." "It is. You can stay until evening," she decided. Mama lets sad people stay if they don't lie. Zuri let out a breath of disbelief. "Since when do you make rules in my house?" "Since you are tired," Amina said simply. That nearly made Akon laugh, but the sound died halfway, as if laughter had become unfamiliar to him. Zuri rubbed a hand over her face. She should have sent him out. She knew that. Trouble never arrived announcing itself as trouble. It came weak, wounded, and easy to pity. Still, she heard herself say, "Until evening." Akon turned toward her. "I don't want to be a burden. You already are. Just be a quiet one. Something flickered in his eyes, then surprise, maybe. Or gratitude, too deep for words. Zuri spent the next hour preparing to leave for the market. She sold vegetables and second-grade tomatoes from a rented stall when the stall owner felt generous enough not to give her space to someone richer. Some days she returned with enough to eat. Some days with bruises on her pride and almost nothing else. As she tied her headscarf, she noticed Ekon studying the broken socket near the wall. "It sparks when it rains," he said. "Yes, I know, it could burn the room. And what do you suggest I fix it with air?" He did not answer with offense. He stood, walked closer, and examined the socket with a concentration that seemed absurd in a shack, with leaking roofing and cracked plaster. Then he looked around, found a bent screwdriver near the basin, and held it up. "May I?" Zuri almost laughed. "You are a beggar, not an electrician." "Possibly both." Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. He removed the loose cover, studied the wiring, then asked for the strip of rubber from an old sandal near the door. 10 minutes later, the socket was secured well enough that the dangerous exposed wire no longer trembled loose. Zuri stared. "How did you do that?" He wiped his hands on his torn trousers. "I don't know. That makes no sense." "I know." She hated the way that answer unsettled her. Not because it was clever, because it did not sound like a trick. It sounded like the truth. Later, when she and Amina walked to the market, with Ekon following a few paces behind, the day turned harsher. The sun rose hot. Dust lifted under passing buses. Men shouted prices over each other. Women balanced baskets on their heads like queens in a kingdom that paid in sweat. At Zuri's stall, the owner, a thick-necked woman named Mirembe, was already waiting. "You are late again?" Mirembe snapped. "The rain flooded the road." "The rain did not flood your mouth. You could still apologize." Zuri bit back the answer that rose in her throat. "I'm here now." Mirembe's eyes slid to Ekon. "And what is this?" "No one. A nobody who follows you." Before Zuri could respond, Mirembe shoved a notebook into her hands. "Your balance for the stall transport fee and spoilage fee." Zuri scanned the page and felt her stomach turn. The numbers were wrong. Inflated. This is more than last week. Prices changed. "No, they didn't." Mirembe smiled thinly. "Are you accusing me?" Zuri's face heated. Around them, sellers were already pretending not to listen while listening to everything. Then Ekon spoke, not loudly, not aggressively, calmly. "The total is false." Every head turned. Mirembe barked a laugh. "Excuse me." He stepped closer and pointed at the notebook. "You repeated the transport charge twice, added spoilage to goods that were never delivered, and changed the unit count from crates to kilos on the final line to make the shortage appear larger." Even Zuri blinked. Mirembe's expression hardened. And what would a street beggar know about records? Ekon did not raise his voice. "Enough to know theft when I see it." A dangerous silence followed. Zuri looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, not because he had defended her, but because he had done it with the precise certainty of a man who had lived among contracts, audits, and lies wearing polished shoes. Mirembe snatched back the notebook. "Take your rotten tomatoes and leave if you don't like my prices." But the stall owners nearby had heard enough. A man from the spice table leaned over. "He's right," he said. "You doubled the charge." Another woman clicked her tongue. "You've done that before." The balance shifted. Mirembe saw it too. She cursed under her breath and waved Zuri away. "Fine. Pay the old amount and go." Zuri did not move immediately. She was staring at Ekon. And for the first time, real fear touched her heart. Because poor men did not speak like that. Lost men did not see numbers like that. And strangers definitely did not look at injustice with the cold, controlled fury of someone who had once lived in a world where power was written on paper before it was spoken aloud. When they returned home that evening, Amina ran inside first. A moment later, her small voice called out from within. Mama Zuri rushed in. Amina stood by the shelf near the bed, holding an old silver keychain Zuri had kept hidden for years among folded cloths. It was scratched and cheap, nothing anyone else would notice. But Ekon froze the instant he saw it. His face changed. All color drained from it. He took one step closer, staring at the object as if it had risen from the dead. And when he finally spoke, his voice came out barely above a whisper. I know that. The room seemed to shrink around that single sentence. I know that. Ekon's voice was almost inaudible, but it struck Zuri with the force of a blow. Amina stood still near the shelf. Her little fingers curled around the silver keychain, while the evening light slipped through the torn curtain and laid long shadows across the floor. Zuri crossed the room in 2 quick steps and took the keychain from her daughter's hand. Where did you find this? Ekon asked. His eyes had locked onto the object with a hunger that frightened her more than any raised voice could have. That is not your concern, Zuri said. But he did not look at her. He looked only at the keychain. It was old, scratched along one edge, with a tiny metal lion hanging from a broken ring. To anyone else, it was worthless. To Zuri, it was one of the last pieces left from a life she had buried without ever truly escaping. Amina glanced from one adult to the other. Mama, why is he looking like that? Zuri forced herself to breathe. Go wash your hands. But Amina... The little girl obeyed, though reluctantly. When she disappeared behind the hanging cloth that separated the washing corner, Zuri turned back to Ekon. How do you know this? He pressed a hand against his temple as if something inside his head were pulling too hard. I don't know. I just... He stopped and squeezed his eyes shut. When I saw it, something moved. What something erode? His voice roughened. No. Not a road. A station, a crowded place, people shouting, a red bag, someone laughing. He opened his eyes again, frustrated. It vanishes when I try to hold it. Zuri's fingers tightened around the keychain until the metal bit into her palm. That keychain had once belonged to Tendai. She had not seen it as a treasure when he first gave it to her. It had been a small, playful thing bought from a roadside vendor the afternoon he missed his bus just to walk her home longer. He had laughed and clipped it onto her market basket, telling her that one day when he was rich and important, she must remind him that he had once spent his last coins on a foolish little lion because he could not bear to stop hearing her laugh. At the time, she had called him dramatic. Now the memory made her chest hurt. She stepped back and tucked the keychain into the fold of her dress. You are tired. That is all. Ekon looked at her as if he knew she was lying, but he said nothing. Zuri turned away before he could ask more. The night settled heavily over the neighborhood. Smoke from cooking fires drifted through the alleys. Children shouted one last time before mothers dragged them indoors. Somewhere in the distance, music throbbed from a bar where people with ruined weeks went to borrow 2 hours of forgetting. Inside the small house, forgetting was impossible. Zuri fed Amina, then Ekon, then pretended to eat more than she did. Her daughter quickly fell asleep, curled on her mat with one arm under her cheek. But Zuri stayed awake, sitting near the stove long after the embers had gone dim. Across the room, Ekon lay still. He seemed to be sleeping, yet she could feel that he was not, because she was not the only one listening to the silence. Her mind had already gone backward, slipping into that old place. She hated the place where hope had once lived, before shame strangled it. 5 years earlier, Zuri had not been living in this cracked room with leaking roofing and unpaid rent. She had been younger then, lighter somehow, though life had never been kind. She sold fruit near the main bus park in the city where men in polished shoes stepped over puddles and women in bright dresses bargained with voices sharper than knives. That was where she first met Tendai. He had not looked like the son of a powerful family that day. He had come alone, sleeves rolled tie loosened, carrying his jacket over one shoulder like a man escaping something. He stopped at her stall because she was arguing with a customer who wanted 5 mangoes for the price of 3. The customer kept grinning, convinced he could bully a poor market woman into surrender. But Zuri was not surrendering. She lifted one mango, sliced it cleanly with her knife, held it out to him and said, "Taste it for free. Then pay properly or leave my table." The customer stared. Tendai laughed. Not mockingly. Genuinely. That laugh was what made her look at him. He was handsome in an infuriatingly effortless way. Tall, neat, with the kind of face strangers trusted too quickly. But what she remembered most was his eyes. Warm, curious, as if the world had not yet taught him to treat ordinary people like background. After the customer paid and left muttering, Tendai bought 2 mangoes he did not need. The next day he came back, then the next. At first Zuri thought he was amusing himself, playing at simplicity before returning to the real world where women like her were invisible. But Tendai kept returning. He asked about her mother, her work, her dreams. He listened when she spoke, really listened, which was rare enough to feel dangerous. Weeks became months. He told her he worked in his family's company, but hated the arrogance that came with money. He said he wanted to build something cleaner, fairer, different from the men before him. She laughed at that too. Rich men always believed they were exceptions until comfort tested them. Yet Tendai kept passing her tests without knowing they were tests. He ate street food with his hands, sat beside old women without flinching at the dust, helped her carry crates when deliveries came late. Once, when a drunk man grabbed Zuri's wrist at the market, Tendai stepped in so fast and so coldly that the entire street fell silent. That was the first time she understood that gentleness in a man meant nothing unless it could stand up against ugliness. After that, she let herself love him, and Tendai loved her back with a fullness that felt terrifying because it seemed real. He spoke of marriage, of a home, of a future where she would never again have to count coins before sleeping. Zuri warned him his family would never accept her. He said he did not care. She almost believed him. Then one evening he arrived with that silver lion keychain and clipped it onto her basket with a grin. One day he told her, "When everything changes, this will prove you knew me before the suits, before the drivers, before the people who bow." She had touched the little lion and smiled. "And if everything changes, maybe you will stop knowing me." His answer came fast, almost offended. "Never." But life had a cruel way of waiting until people made promises before tearing them open. The change began with his family. Zuri met them only once properly, and once was enough. Tendai had insisted there was no point hiding anymore. He would tell them about her, stand firm, make them understand. Zuri had worn her cleanest dress and wrapped her hair carefully, though part of her new dignity offered no protection in rooms where some people had already decided your worth before you entered. His aunt looked at her first as if she were a stain. His cousin Jabari looked at her with amused contempt, like a man watching a child reach for a throne. No one asked Zuri what she did, what she had survived, what kind of person she was. They asked where she came from, who her father had been, whether Tendai understood how women from those places trapped men with tears and babies. Tendai defended her, loudly, without shame. But Zuri had still gone home with her skin burning. Then, only weeks later, Tendai had to travel for a company matter inland. It was supposed to be brief, 3 days at most. He came to her the night before leaving, held her face in both hands, and promised that when he returned, he would make everything final. No more hiding, no more insults, no more waiting. He kissed her forehead and left. And that was the last night Zuri saw him as the man she knew. The first lie arrived 2 days later. A woman from his household came to the market carrying pity in her mouth like poison. Tendai had changed his mind, she said. His family had chosen better for him, a respectable woman, an educated woman, a woman of his class. Zuri laughed in her face. Then Tendai did not return. 3 days became 7. 7 became 14. Zuri went to his office and was turned away. She went to his family home and was kept outside the gate while a servant told her not to humiliate herself further. She begged for news. No one gave any. Then Jabari came himself. He wore a beautiful suit and a cruel smile. "Tendai is done with this foolishness," he said. "You were a distraction, nothing more. Be grateful it ended before you embarrassed yourself in public." She spat at his shoes. He looked down, then back at her with pure disgust. "You women always think tears can buy you a different life." That was the day she learned she was pregnant. Not from joy, from fear. Because by then the city already knew the story his family wanted known, that she had chased a wealthy man and been discarded. That she was shameless. That she had imagined promises that were never made. No one cared what was true. They cared what sounded powerful. Zuri sold what little she owned to survive the pregnancy. She changed neighborhoods, worked until her ankles swelled, cried only at night where no one could hear. And when labor came, it came in a government clinic with flickering lights and no hand to hold except a nurse too tired to speak kindly. She named her daughter Amina because the child deserved a name that meant trust, even if trust had already ruined the mother. Now, 5 years later, that buried pain sat breathing in her house under another name. Zuri rose from the stove and looked across the room. Ekon had turned onto his back. One arm covered his eyes. Whether he slept or pretended she could not tell. But she knew one thing with terrible certainty now. That keychain could not have meant anything to him unless the past between them was somehow alive inside his broken memory. And if that was true, then the stranger on her floor was not just a man in need. He was the wound she had spent 5 years trying not to bleed from. In the darkness, Ekon spoke without moving his arm. "Who is Tendai Zuri?" went cold. For a long moment she could not breathe. Then she answered each word flat and sharp. "A dead man." The next morning the city woke under a hard, white sun. Heat climbed early over the rooftops, pressing down on the crowded streets, until even the air felt impatient. In Zuri's neighborhood, women swept dust from one doorstep to another, as if poverty could be pushed away with a broom. Boys chased a punctured football through the alley. Someone cursed at a stalled minibus. Life continued with its usual rough rhythm. But far from the workers' quarter in the glass and steel heart of the city, another world was already trembling. At the headquarters of Okoye Holdings, silence had become a form of fear. The building rose over the financial district like a monument to power. Polished black stone mirrored windows, security gates, men in dark suits moving with rehearsed purpose. Yet beneath that perfect surface, panic had been spreading for weeks. Executives lowered their voices in corridors. Assistants avoided eye contact. Department heads signed papers too quickly, then stayed late to whisper behind closed doors, because the company's chief executive officer, Tendai Okoye, had vanished. Officially, the board claimed he was taking a private medical leave. Then they said he was under emotional strain. Then they hinted that he had stepped away voluntarily after making erratic decisions. Each version contradicted the last, but in corporate Africa, as in every place where money stood taller than truth, people accepted lies when the lies came wrapped in authority. At the center of that authority stood Jabari Okoye. He was Tendai's cousin deputy chairman of the board and a man whose smile never reached his eyes. He had the smooth manners of old wealth and the patience of a snake warming itself before a strike. In public, he spoke with sorrow about his missing cousin. In private, he had already begun rearranging the kingdom. That morning, he stood at the head of a long conference table on the 31st floor, one hand resting lightly on the back of a leather chair. Around him sat directors, legal advisors, regional managers, and 3 nervous investors connected by screen from abroad. On the wall behind him, a presentation glowed. Transition strategy. Executive stability phase. Even the title was a lie. Ladies and gentlemen, Jabari said, his voice calm and expensive. I know the past weeks have been difficult. Tendai's absence has created uncertainty, and uncertainty is dangerous in business. We cannot allow sentiment to endanger shareholder confidence. The phrase landed exactly as he intended. Not brotherhood, not concern, not truth. Shareholder confidence. Numbers first. Humanity later. A grey-haired board member cleared his throat. Are we any closer to hearing from Tendai directly? Jabari lowered his head a fraction, as if pained by the question. Unfortunately, no. Our family is deeply concerned, of course, but at this stage, the company must protect itself from instability. On the screen, new charts appeared: profit projections, restructuring proposals, cost reductions, cut staff, freeze benefits, sell 2 community subsidiaries, delay scholarship funding, shift medical relief budgets into acquisition capital. Some of the executives glanced at each other. Others kept their faces blank. In rooms like this, people learned early that outrage was expensive. Jabari clicked to the next slide. Until Tendai is in a position to return, I will continue exercising temporary executive oversight. Temporary. The word had begun to rot from overuse. At the end of the table sat Imani Ndlovu, senior legal counsel, one of the few people in the company who had once spoken to Tendai without flattery. She was elegant, precise, and known for the dangerous habit of telling the truth when it would have been safer to decorate it. She looked at the slide, then at Jabari. Temporary oversight does not authorize asset stripping, she said. The room tightened. Jabari smiled faintly. That is a dramatic term. It is an accurate one. He clasped his hands loosely. We are streamlining. You are dismantling programs Tendai spent years building, and you are sentimental, Imani. No, she replied. I can read. A few eyes dropped to the table. Nobody wanted to be seen watching this. Jabari's expression remained composed, but something in his gaze cooled. These decisions are necessary. For whom? He took one unhurried step toward her. For the survival of the company. Imani did not blink. Or for the convenience of the man preparing to inherit it. Silence exploded through the room without sound. No one moved. Even the investors on the screen seemed to pause. Then Jabari laughed softly, as if she had made an impolite joke at dinner. You overestimate my ambition, and you underestimate how visible greed becomes when it is dressed too quickly. The chairman, an elderly man who had long ago traded courage for comfort, shifted uneasily. Perhaps we should remain focused. No, Imani cut in, still watching Jabari. Perhaps we should finally become unfocused enough to ask the real question. Her voice sharpened. Where is Tendai? The question hit the room like a thrown stone. Every person there had thought it. No one had wanted to say it aloud. Jabari's smile disappeared completely now. We have already discussed this. No. We have repeated your version of it. Be careful. Why, she asked. Because a missing CEO is awkward, because people are beginning to notice that the man taking over has benefited from every hour, the real one remains absent. The chairman spoke again, weaker this time. Imani. But she stood, and once she stood, the truth in the room became harder to ignore. Tendai was not unstable, she said. He was preparing to reject the Kivu mining merger. He was reviewing internal contracts. He had already questioned irregular transfers from 3 holding accounts. Her gaze flicked across the table, catching one finance director, then another. And suddenly, before those reviews were completed, he disappeared. Since then, the person moving fastest to consolidate power is the same man urging us not to ask where he is. Jabari's face had become almost expressionless. That was when he was most dangerous. You are emotional, he said quietly. And you are frightened, she answered. He turned to security at the door. Escort Ms. Ndlovu out. Effective immediately, she is suspended pending review for insubordination and reputational harm. A murmur broke across the table. Not protest, just shock. The kind of shock weak people make when witnessing injustice they have no intention of interrupting. 2 guards stepped forward. Imani gathered her folder herself before they could touch her. As she moved toward the door, she stopped once beside the conference table and looked at every face in that room. One by one. "You are all watching a theft," she said, "not only of a company, of a man's life." Then her eyes landed on Jabari. And when truth finally returns, it will not ask who was innocent, it will ask who stayed comfortable. She walked out without waiting for permission. The door closed behind her. For a long second, no one spoke. Jabari exhaled once, adjusted his cuff, and faced the room again, as if nothing significant had occurred. As I was saying, he continued smoothly, the transition must proceed. And because power had a way of disciplining the weak, the meeting went on. Hours later, on another floor lower in the hierarchy and farther from luxury, whispers moved through the building faster than official memos ever could. In the security operations room, Kwesi Adu, a stocky, middle-aged supervisor with tired eyes and a limp he had earned in his youth, sat before a bank of monitors and listened in silence as 2 younger guards talked near the door. They fired her, one asked. Suspended, the other said. Same thing, for asking where the CEO is. The second guard shrugged. People disappear when they ask the wrong questions. Kwesi said nothing, but his hand stopped moving over the logbook, because he remembered the night Tendai disappeared. Not everything, just enough to make sleep harder since then. That evening, the CEO had left the building alone earlier than usual. No official convoy, no assistant, no schedule update. That was unusual already. Then, 20 minutes later, one exterior camera feed had cut for exactly 4 minutes near the underground access road. When it returned, the road was empty. Later, a special order came down from above archive. The footage: restrict access, do not discuss irregularities outside security management. Kwesi had obeyed. Men with children learned how expensive principals could become. Still, he had noticed something else that night, something he had never spoken aloud. A black SUV idling in the blind zone before the feed dropped. A vehicle registered not to corporate transport, but to a private holding company he had seen once before in internal files connected to Jabari's office. Kwesi had told himself it meant nothing. Then Tendai never came back. Since then, the silence around the disappearance had grown too neat, too managed, too expensive. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the frozen image on one of the archived screens. The company entrance, at dusk, men coming and going, glass doors reflecting orange sky. Somewhere behind that ordinary image lay the last clean moment before something rotten began. A younger guard noticed him staring. "You ever think he might actually be dead?" the man asked. Kwesi's jaw tightened. "People in this country die every day." "That is not an answer." "No," Kwesi said quietly. "It isn't." Back in the executive wing, Jabari had retreated to his private office. From the outside, it was a temple of control: mahogany shelves, sculpted art, city skyline, liquor in crystal silence, thick enough to feel purchased. He poured himself a drink he did not need, and stood by the glass, watching the traffic 31 floors below. A knock came. Enter. A man in a navy suit stepped in, closed the door behind him, and waited. His name was Mandla, one of the discreet fixers Jabari used for problems that could not appear in emails. "Well?" Jabari asked. Mandla kept his voice low. "Nothing confirmed yet." Meaning there was a sighting in the East District. Possibly a homeless male matching part of the description from the old file. Jabari turned slowly. Possibly the source was uncertain. "That is why I do not pay sources. I pay certainty." Mandla lowered his eyes. "We are checking again." Jabari crossed the room and set the untouched drink down. For the first time that day, Irritation sharpened his face into something uglier than arrogance. "You told me the problem was finished. It should have been," Jabari repeated softly. "That word is becoming very costly." Mandla swallowed. Even if he survived after this long, he would have nothing. No identification, no leverage, no credibility. Jabari's gaze hardened. A man like Tendai does not need much leverage. He only needs breath. The fixer did not answer. Jabari walked back to the window. 5 years ago, removing Zuri had been easy. Cheap girl from the market. No family name, no power, a few lies in the right ears, a few humiliations at the gate, a few strategically cruel words, and the problem had dissolved into the slums where inconvenient women were expected to disappear. But Tendai had been harder, too principled, too stubborn, too beloved by the wrong employees. When persuasion failed, other methods had been required. Jabari had never regretted that. Not until now. He looked over his shoulder. Find him, quietly. And if it is him, Jabari's answer came without hesitation. Then this time I do not want uncertainty. Mandla nodded once and left. The office fell silent again. Jabari stood alone, staring down at the city that was almost his. He had spent years waiting for Tendai to step aside, fail weaken, become corrupt enough to destroy himself. Instead, Tendai had insisted on integrity. Community projects, clean audits, fair wages, idiotic moral vanity dressed as leadership. So Jabari had done what clever men always did when virtue blocked profit. He had treated virtue like an obstacle. And now, somewhere in the same city, a missing man might still be alive. Far away in a narrow neighborhood Jabari would never enter willingly. Zuri was kneeling on the floor, scrubbing Amina's school dress, while Ekon sat outside under the shade of a patched awning, one hand pressed to his temple. A headache had come suddenly violent and strange. Fragments flashed behind his eyes. A gleaming elevator, a boardroom table. A signature halted halfway across a page, a voice saying, "You always choose the wrong side of blood." Then darkness, blows, the metallic taste of blood in his mouth, gravel under his cheek, someone taking his watch, his wallet, his name. He bent forward sharply. Zuri looked up from inside the doorway. "What is wrong?" Ekon opened his eyes, shaken. I think he said slowly, "Someone wanted me erased." And in the financial district on the top floors of Okoye Holdings, the man who had ordered that erasure began to understand for the first time that ghosts were only frightening when they returned with memory. That night, the rain did not come. Heat stayed trapped in the walls of Zuri's house long after sunset, making the air feel heavy and restless. Amina slept lightly, 1 foot half outside her thin blanket, her curls damp against her forehead. Outside, the alley murmured with the last sounds of the neighborhood. Distant laughter, a radio crackling, the scrape of someone dragging a plastic chair across cement. Inside, no one truly rested. Ekon sat near the doorway with his back against the frame, staring into the darkness as if the night itself might answer him. Zuri pretended to mend one of Amina's dresses by lantern light, though her needle had stopped moving minutes ago. Someone wanted me erased. Those words had remained in the room like smoke. Zuri had heard many things in life. Promises, lies, insults, excuses. But something in the way Ekon had said that sentence unsettled her more than all the rest. Not dramatic, not confused, certain. A man does not speak that way unless something inside him has touched truth. Amina turned in her sleep and murmured, "Mama." Zuri looked over instantly. The child settled again. Safe, warm enough, breathing evenly. That was all that mattered. It had to be. Yet when Zuri's eyes returned to Ekon, she found him looking at the silver lion keychain she had placed on the shelf above the stove, just beyond easy reach. He had not asked for it again. But his gaze kept going back. They're pulled by something stronger than curiosity. Finally, he spoke. Was Tendai your husband? Zuri's fingers tightened around the dress in her lap. No. Your lover? She laughed once without humor. You ask directly. I don't know how else to ask. For a moment she said nothing. Then she set the dress aside. He was the father of my child, she said flatly. Or so I was foolish enough to believe. Ekon lowered his eyes. You think he abandoned you? I don't think. I lived it. His jaw moved slightly as if those words had struck somewhere deeper than he expected. Zuri stood. Sleep. We both need our strength tomorrow. But before she could turn away, a small voice drifted from the mat. No, Amina said sleepily. He didn't abandon us. Both adults froze. The little girl pushed herself upright, rubbing one eye. I had a dream. Zuri exhaled. Amina, go back to bed. But Amina looked directly at Ekon as if she had forgotten the entire world beyond him. In the dream she whispered, You were trying to come home. Zuri's heart gave a hard, painful beat. Children say strange things. Children stitch the day's scraps into stories and call them truth. She knew that. Still, the silence that followed felt larger than the room. Ekon swallowed. Did I get there? Amina shook her head slowly. Bad people stopped you. Zuri crossed the room and took her daughter by the shoulders. Enough dreams for one night. Lie down. Amina obeyed, but even after lying back down, she kept staring at Ekon, as if she were waiting for him to remember what she somehow already knew. The next morning came sharp and bright. Zuri left early for the market, taking Amina with her because there was no one she fully trusted to watch the child. Ekon stayed behind at first, still weak, but by midday he appeared at the far end of the stalls, walking more steadily than before. Zuri saw him before he reached her table. There was dust on his trousers and fatigue in his face, but there was also something else, focus. As if waking pain had burned away some of the fog around him. You should be resting, she said, and you should not be lifting crates alone, he answered. Before she could argue, he picked up one of the heavier baskets and moved it into the shade. Mirembe, the stall owner who had tried to cheat Zuri the day before, watched from 2 rows away with narrowed eyes. Your beggar has returned, she called loudly enough for others to hear. Zuri ignored her. But Mirembe was not finished. She strode closer, gold earrings flashing in the sun. Tell me, Zuri, does he work for food or for a place in your bed? Several vendors looked over. Heat flooded Zuri's face. Amina, sitting on an overturned crate nearby, went very still. And Ekon turned. He did not shout. That was what made it worse for Mirembe. He simply faced her with a level gaze that stripped the cruelty out of her performance and exposed it for what it was. You overcharge widows and insult mothers in front of children, he said. If shame still lived in you, it would be choking by now. The market fell silent. Mirembe's mouth opened, then closed. No one had ever spoken to her like that in public. She recovered quickly enough to sneer. And who are you to lecture me astray? For the briefest second, something dangerous flashed in Ekon's face. Not street anger, not wounded pride. Authority. It vanished almost immediately, but not before Zuri saw it. I am a man, he said quietly, watching you confuse power with ugliness. Mirembe stepped back first. Not because she was frightened of his body, because she was unsettled by his presence, by the odd, impossible dignity of a man dressed like ruin, but speaking like he had once commanded rooms. When she walked away, muttering curses, the market noise slowly returned. But nothing returned to normal inside Zuri. Who are you? She thought. That question followed them home. Late afternoon light filled the small house with gold when Amina dragged out an old tin box from beneath the bed. It held the few things Zuri had not been able to throw away over the years. A church ribbon, 2 letters from her late mother, a bracelet with a missing clasp, and a photograph folded so many times the edges had begun to tear. Zuri almost snatched the box away. Almost. But she was too late. Amina had already opened it. "What's this?" the child asked, lifting the photograph. Zuri's pulse stopped. The picture had been taken at the market years ago by a traveling photographer who charged coins for memories with proof. In it, Zuri stood younger, laughing despite herself, and beside her stood Tendai, not in a suit, but in a rolled-up white shirt, one hand carrying a basket of fruit, the other half raised as if he had been caught speaking. Amina stared at the photo. Then she looked up at Ekon, then back down. "Mama," she said slowly. "This is him." The room went completely still. Zuri moved first. She took the photograph from Amina's hands and folded it closed. No. But the child's eyes had gone wide with certainty. It is him. Ekon had not moved, not even to breathe it seemed. His gaze locked onto the torn edge of the photograph Zuri now held against her chest. His face drained of color. He took one step forward, then another. "Let me see it," he said. "No." His voice roughened. "Please." Zuri wanted to refuse. She should have refused. But something in that word, please, not as manipulation, not as demand, but as desperation, broke through her defense for 1 second. She handed him the photograph. Ekon stared at it as if he were staring into a grave. His fingers trembled. At first, nothing happened. Then his breathing changed. Then came the first whisper almost to himself. "That shirt." He touched the man in the picture. "I bought it in a hurry because—" He stopped. His free hand flew to his temple. Amina slid off the bed and moved closer, but Zuri pulled her back instinctively. Ekon's voice came again, fractured now, as if words were being dragged through broken glass. "You were angry because I was late." He was looking at Zuri, but not seeing the present. Seeing the past. A man at the bus stop argued over mango prices. I laughed. "You said I only laughed because I didn't need the money." Zuri's knees nearly gave way. Only 2 people had been there that day. Only 2. Ekon pressed the heel of his palm to his forehead harder. I said one day I would build you a house with a kitchen big enough to keep you from cursing over smoky charcoal." His breath caught. "You told me not to promise things like rich boys in films." Zuri could not speak. Amina looked between them, confused but trembling with excitement. Mama Ekon looked up fully now, and when he did, something had changed in his eyes. Not all the fog was gone, but enough to hurt. "Zuri," he said. Not a question. Her name. Her real name in his mouth, exactly the way Tendai used to say it, soft on the first syllable, careful on the second, as though he were holding something breakable. Tears rose so fast she hated herself for them. "No," she whispered. He took another step, then stopped as if he knew he had already crossed too much distance at once. "I remember the market," he said. "I remember your red scarf. I remember the rain the first day I walked you home." His face twisted with effort. "I remember promising I would come back." A sound escaped Zuri that was too broken to be called a laugh. "Then where were you?" she asked. The question cut the room open. Ekon Tendai, if that was truly who he was, looked stricken. "I don't know all of it yet, but you know enough to say my name." "Yes." "You know enough to remember promises." "Yes." "Do you know I gave birth alone?" Her voice was rising now, years of buried humiliation suddenly tearing upward. "Do you know your family spat on me? Do you know your cousin looked me in the face and told me I was filth? Do you know I buried you in my heart because it was the only way to stay alive?" Amina flinched. Ekon did too. He lowered his head, not in defense, but in grief. "I believe you," he said quietly. That answer stunned her more than denial would have. No excuses, no argument, No attempt to soften what she said. Just pain. Amina looked up at him, eyes shining. "Are you my daddy?" No one moved. No one rescued the moment. Because there are questions so large that silence itself becomes the answer circling them. Ekon's face broke, not dramatically, not with some grand display, just one terrible crack in the control he had been holding on to. He knelt slowly until he was level with the child. His voice shook. "I think I am." Amina smiled through sudden tears, as if she had been waiting all her life for words she barely understood. But Zuri turned away. Because in the same instant that hope burst into the room, fear came with it. If Ekon was truly Tendai, then the past had not died. It had found her house again. And somewhere beyond those walls, the men who had erased him once might soon realize he had started to remember. That night, no one in Zuri's house knew how to stand inside the new truth. The lantern burned low. Shadows moved softly across the cracked wall. Outside, the neighborhood slowly gave itself over to darkness, but inside that small room, the air felt painfully awake. Amina refused to sleep at first. She sat between Zuri and Ekon on the floor mat, her little hands resting on her knees, watching them both with the fierce, solemn attention of a child who knew something important had happened, even if she could not yet understand its shape. "So you are my daddy?" she asked again. Zuri shut her eyes for 1 second. Ekon did not answer immediately. He looked at the child the way a man might look at sunlight after years underground, grateful, frightened, almost unable to bear it. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. "I may be," he said, "but I do not want to lie to you." Amina frowned. "You already know, Mama." "Yes, and you knew me before I was born." His throat moved. "I think so. That means you are." Children did not care for legal proofs or blood tests or cautious adult language. They saw the heart of a thing and stepped directly toward it. Zuri reached for her daughter's shoulder. "Amina, enough for tonight." But the girl twisted toward Ekon again. "Why didn't you come?" There it was. Not the question adults rehearsed. The real one. Not "where were you?" Not "who are you?" Just "why didn't you come?" Ekon lowered his gaze so fast it was almost a flinch. "I was taken away," he said quietly. Amina tilted her head. "By bad people." "Yes." The little girl nodded, as if that matched the dream she had already accepted as truth. Then she leaned sideways and rested her head against his arm. The gesture was small. It destroyed him. Zuri saw it happen in silence the exact second a man realized that the child, who should have known the weight of his hand since infancy, was touching him for the first time at 5 years old. He bowed his head over Amina's curls, not quite touching her, as if even comfort had to be earned. For one dangerous moment, pity rose in Zuri's chest. She crushed it immediately. Pity had cost her too much already. "Amina bed," she said more sharply. This time the child obeyed. She kissed Zuri's cheek, then surprised Ekon by kissing his bruised forehead too. "Don't disappear again," she whispered. When she settled on her mat and finally drifted to sleep, the silence returned heavier than before. Zuri remained standing near the stove with her arms crossed. Ekon stayed seated on the floor as though he knew better than to rise and shrink the distance between them. At last, she said, "Start from the last thing you remember before you vanished." He looked up. "I remember leaving the office." "Why a meeting?" "No." He pressed his fingers to his temple. "Not a meeting. An argument first." "With who?" His expression tightened. "Jabari." The name hit Zuri like cold water. She had not heard it spoken inside her house in years, but the poison in it had never faded. "What argument? I cannot hold all of it." He exhaled. "Documents. Accounts. A project I refused to approve." He was angry. His eyes sharpened with effort. Very angry. Zuri leaned against the wall, forcing herself to stay steady. Then I left the building alone. I remember thinking I needed space. I remember a call. No, not a call. A message asking me to meet someone. He shut his eyes. There was an access road behind the office. Dark. A vehicle waiting. His breathing changed. Zuri saw it happen again, the past seizing him by the throat. How many men, she asked. 3, maybe 4. His voice grew rough. Someone hit me from behind before I could turn fully. I fought. I know I fought. Then Jabari's voice, her heart hammered. What did he say? Ekon's face twisted as though the memory itself were physical pain. He said, "You always choose the wrong side of blood." The room went still. That sounded like Jabari. Calm, smiling, cruel enough to make betrayal sound like wisdom. Zuri stared at him. "You are certain?" "Yes, and after that, blows, gravel, I tasted blood." Someone searched my pockets, his hands clenched unconsciously. My watch, my wallet, my identification, my phone. He opened his eyes. They wanted me nameless. Zuri's mouth went dry. This was bigger than abandonment, bigger than a rich man losing his nerve, bigger than family interference. This was erasure. And me, she asked the word, barely leaving her throat. When did they use me? His eyes filled with fresh horror because he understood the question instantly. After, he said. I think after. How I remember almost nothing clearly. But I remember hearing your name once. He pressed his palm hard against his forehead, fighting the memory into shape. And laughter. Jabari's laughter. He said something like, "Now she will learn what happens when street girls aim too high." Zuri turned away. For years she had imagined Tendai leaving by choice, because that pain had at least contained a logic she could survive. He had been weak. She had been naive. The world had done what it always did. But this meant someone had reached into both their lives and torn them apart on purpose. She laughed once, but the sound came out broken. So that was the game, she said. Not just to remove me, to punish me. Ekon rose carefully to his feet. "Zuri, don't." He stopped. She pressed both hands against the table, fighting for control. "Do you understand what 5 years means?" He said nothing. "Do you understand what it is to carry a child while people spit at you in the market? To hear women laugh because the rich man never came back? To stand outside a gate and be told you were too dirty to be admitted, to give birth alone, bleeding humiliated and still wake up the next day because the baby is crying, and milk does not care about grief." Each sentence struck him harder than shouting would have. She faced him now, tears bright in her eyes, but fury holding them in place. "You may be a victim too. I can see that now. But I was the one left to live the punishment." Ekon lowered his head. "I know." "No," she snapped. "You do not know. You are only beginning to remember. I had to remember every day." He accepted that blow without protest. For a long moment he said nothing. Then very quietly, "You are right." That answer almost undid her more than any defense could have. No rich man's pride. No demand for instant forgiveness, no performance of wounded innocence, only shame. "I should have found a way back," he said. "Even if they stripped everything from me, I should have crawled back." Zuri stared at him. "How?" "With no memory, I do not know," he said. "But the fact that I do not know does not make your suffering smaller." The honesty of that sentence landed inside her like a knife turned gently. She looked away first. At dawn, the city was already hot. Zuri stepped outside before Amina woke, needing air that did not smell of memory. Women were sweeping the alley. A radio muttered news from somewhere nearby. Mama Sade, wrapped in a bright kanga, sat on an upturned bucket sorting dried fish. She looked up immediately. "You were awake late," the older woman said. Zuri almost kept walking, but exhaustion had thinned her caution. "What do you know about Jabari Okoye?" she asked. Mama Sade's hand stopped. That alone was answer enough to make Zuri turn fully. The older woman's mouth tightened. "Why are you saying that name here? So you do know him?" Mama Sade clicked her tongue and returned to sorting fish, but her movements had grown slower. "People in this city know many names. Not like that." Silence stretched. Then Mama Sade sighed. "Years ago, before you moved here, I cleaned offices in the financial district. Night work. Good money, bad knees." She glanced up. His drivers used to come to the side entrance sometimes. Too much perfume in the cars. Too much secrecy. Zuri stepped closer, and one night I heard one of them bragging outside while smoking. Said the boss had solved a family problem. Said some woman from the market would never trouble them again. Mama Sade's jaw hardened. "I did not know it was you then." A coldness spread through Zuri's body. When was this? About 5 years ago. Exactly when her life had been destroyed. Before she could speak again, a voice came from behind her. "I need to call someone." Ikon stood in the doorway. He had heard enough. Zuri turned. "Who's someone from the company? Someone who may still be loyal." His face was pale, but steady. "A lawyer. I can't remember every detail, but one name keeps returning." "What name?" He looked at her. "Imani." Mama Sade rose slowly from her bucket. Lawyer Zuri ignored her. "And what do you think happens if you call people from that world? You think Jabari won't hear? You think he isn't already watching for cracks?" "I know," Ekon said. "No, you still do not know enough." His gaze did not move from hers. "Then tell me." So she did. She told him how Jabari had come to the gate, smiling while servants watched. How he had told her Tendai was ashamed of her. How he said men of status sometimes made dirty mistakes, but wise women accepted payment and disappeared quietly. How she had spat at him. How his smile changed then, not to anger, but to something worse, amusement. And finally she told Ikon the part she had never spoken aloud to anyone. The last thing Jabari said before he left, she whispered, was this: "If you are carrying anything of his, raise it alone. It will be the only thing you ever get from our family." Ekon's face went white with fury. Not loud fury, the deadliest kind. Controlled. Total. For the first time since stumbling into her life as a wounded stranger, he looked less like a lost man and more like someone dangerous when cornered. He took one step forward. "I will destroy him." Zuri's eyes flashed. "No." He stopped. "We are not rich," she said. "We do not get to make promises like that and survive them." She pointed toward the sleeping house behind him. "You have already been taken from us once. I will not let my child lose whatever this is before it even begins." Ikon looked toward the doorway where Amina still slept inside. When he turned back, the fury had not vanished. It had simply been forced into discipline. "Then we do it carefully," he said. Zuri held his gaze for a long moment, and slowly, against every instinct built from 5 years of betrayal, she realized the truth had shifted again. This was no longer only about whether Ekon was really Tendai. Now it was about whether two wounded people could stand side by side long enough to face the man who had broken both their lives. Inside the house, Amina's sleepy voice called out, "Mama, Daddy." Both adults froze, then looked at each other, and in that fragile, terrifying moment, they both understood the same thing. The truth was no longer buried, which meant danger had already begun moving toward them. Danger announced itself that afternoon in the smallest possible way. A motorcycle stopped at the mouth of the alley. Not unusual. Motorcycles came and went all day, carrying bread, water, gossip, medicine, unpaid hope. But this one idled too long. The rider did not call out for anyone. He did not remove his helmet. He simply sat there, engine humming, looking down the narrow lane toward Zuri's house. Mama Sade noticed first. She was gutting fish under a shade cloth, her hands working automatically, even while her eyes sharpened. Across the alley, two boys stopped kicking their punctured ball and stared too. The rider remained still for another 10 seconds, then drove away without delivering anything. By the time Zuri stepped outside with a basin of washing, Mama Sade was already waiting. "Someone was watching your house," the older woman said. Zuri's stomach tightened instantly. What did he look like? Covered. Helmet. Dark jacket. Mama Sade lowered her voice. Not local. Zuri did not even pretend calm. She put down the basin and went straight inside. Ekon was seated at the table repairing the loose strap on Amina's school bag with needle and thread, his broad hands moving with clumsy care. Amina knelt beside him, supervising with enormous seriousness. "No, like this," the child said. "You have to pull tighter or my pencils will fall out." He obeyed at once. "Yes, madam." Under any other sky, the sight might have been absurdly tender. Under this one, it became unbearable. There was a man watching the house, Zuri said. Ekon's hands stopped. He did not ask how she knew. He did not waste a word. "How long?" "Long enough." He rose immediately. Amina looked up. "What happened?" "Nothing yet," Zuri said too quickly. "Go sit on the bed." The child obeyed, but her eyes stayed wide. Ekon moved to the curtain and peered through the edge without revealing himself. The alley looked ordinary again. Women walking, a child crying, a radio playing from somewhere unseen. That was what made fear so ugly. It entered dressed like normal life. He let the curtain fall. "They've started looking," he said quietly. Zuri folded her arms to keep from shaking. "Then go." He turned sharply. "What go? Leave before they come back." The words shocked even Amina. The little girl slid off the bed. "Mama." No, Zuri snapped, then softened her tone for her daughter's sake. "Go to the corner, Amina." Once the child moved away, Zuri faced him fully. "I meant what I said before. I will not let my daughter be dragged into whatever war follows you." Ekon stared at her as if he had been struck. "This is my war too," he said. "No. This started in your world long before it swallowed mine. And if I leave?" he asked, voice low. "Do you think that ends it?" She opened her mouth and found no answer waiting, because that was the truth she hated most. If Jabari's people had found the alley, then leaving might not protect them. It might only make them easier to isolate. Still, fear made harsh decisions feel like wisdom. "If you stay," she said, "they will come harder." "If I go," he replied, "I go blind, injured, alone, and they will still know where you live." Zuri looked away first. That weakness enraged her. Amina came slowly back toward them, hugging the repaired school bag to her chest. "Are bad people coming here?" Neither adult answered quickly enough. The child's gaze moved from one face to the other, and in that tiny silence, she understood more than they wanted her to. Ekon knelt before her. "Listen to me." She nodded very still. "If Mama tells you to hide, you hide. If she tells you to stay quiet, you stay quiet, no matter what you hear." Amina swallowed. "Like in my dream." Zuri closed her eyes for 1 second. Ekon's expression changed, but he kept his voice calm. "Yes, like in your dream. Will you disappear again?" The question landed between them like a blade. He answered without hesitation. "Not if I can help it." Amina searched his face, then stepped forward and wrapped both arms around his neck. Zuri's breath caught. The embrace was too trusting, too immediate, too costly. Ekon froze, then slowly placed one hand against the back of the child's head, not holding tightly, as if still afraid love might be something he had no right to touch. And in that moment, Zuri saw it clearly. Not guilt, not performance, loss. A man meeting the daughter he had been robbed of one ordinary gesture at a time. That should have softened her. Instead, it made her angrier, because every tenderness now came with 5 years missing behind it. That evening, after Amina fell asleep, Zuri made her choice. "We move him tonight," Mama Sade said from the doorway, having arrived, uninvited as usual, but more useful than most invited people ever were. "My cousin's old storage room behind the laundry sheds. No one checks there." Zuri looked at Ekon. "You heard." He sat in silence for several seconds before nodding once. "If that is what keeps Amina safe, I'll go." The lack of resistance made her chest tighten unexpectedly. She had been prepared for argument, for insistence, for a wealthy man's wounded pride reappearing under borrowed poverty. Instead, he accepted Egsa from the same house he had barely begun to enter. Mama Sade studied him with narrowed eyes. "You do listen when it matters." He gave a tired half-smile. "Pain is educational." They waited until full dark. The neighborhood became a maze of shadows and cooking smoke. Somewhere farther off, music from a wedding celebration drifted through the night, cruel in its happiness. Zuri wrapped Amina in a shawl despite the heat and told her they were walking to visit Mama Sade's cousin. The girl, sleepy and trusting, asked no questions. Ekon kept to the darker side of the alley. He moved better now, but still with the slight stiffness of a man not fully healed. Once, when a truck backfired at the road, he reacted instantly, shoulders turning, eyes tracking exits, body alert before memory could explain why. Zuri noticed. So did Mama Sade. "That one has lived around danger before," the older woman muttered. They reached the storage room behind the laundry sheds, a cramped space with a tin roof, a narrow cot, and the strong smell of soap and damp cloth. Hardly safer than Zuri's house, but hidden. Mama Sade unlocked it and pushed the door open. "This is all there is." Ekon looked around, then nodded. "It's enough." Amina, now more awake, frowned up at him. "Why can't you stay at our house?" No one answered immediately. Finally, Zuri said, "Because grown-up problems are stupid." Amina considered that. "That sounds true." Even Mama Sade almost smiled. Then the child turned to Ekon. "Can I come tomorrow?" His gaze flicked toward Zuri first, instinctively seeking permission. That alone unsettled her. Tendai years ago had always moved forward confidently, believing love itself would solve what power complicated. Ekon had learned caution the hard way. "If your mother says yes," he answered. Amina stepped close and touched the lion keychain hanging from Zuri's hand. She had insisted on bringing it tonight, claiming it made everyone less sad. Then she looked up at him and asked with all the directness of 5 years old, "Did you love Mama before you forgot?" The room went still. Zuri nearly told her to be quiet, but something in her froze. Ekon did not rush the answer. He looked at Zuri first, not demanding, not pleading, only holding the weight of the question honestly. Then he said yes. Amina nodded as if the sky had confirmed it. And now, that was crueler. Not because the answer was difficult, because it required standing inside the ruins of the first love and naming what survived. Ekon's voice came softer this time. "I remember enough to know I never stopped." Zuri turned away so fast it almost looked like anger. Maybe it was, because memories were one thing, love was another, and love after betrayal or the appearance of betrayal had a way of sounding like insult. Mama Sade clapped her hands once, breaking the moment. "Enough. The child needs sleep. The man needs hiding. And you," she pointed at Zuri, "need less tragedy in your face before it turns permanent." Back at the house later, after Amina had finally fallen asleep, Zuri sat alone on the stool near the stove. The room felt wrong without him. Quieter, yes. Safer, perhaps. But wrong. That truth irritated her more than anything else. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the shape of an absence that had no right to matter already. A soft knock sounded at the back wall. Zuri rose, instantly grabbed the metal ladle from the stove like a weapon and went to the narrow rear opening. A voice whispered, "It's me." She stared through the gap. Ekon stood there in shadow. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "I didn't come in." "That is not an answer." He held something up through the darkness, a folded scrap of paper. "I remembered a number." Zuri did not move. "Imani's office line," he said. "Or what used to be her office line. I wrote it down before I forgot it again." She took the paper slowly. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, accidental, and far too intimate. For a second, neither moved. Then Zuri pulled back first. "You should go." "I know." He remained there anyway. The silence between them shifted into something more dangerous than fear unfinished feeling. At last he said, "You were right to send me away." She looked at him sharply. "Do not make me the villain because I chose my child." "I'm not." His voice was tired, steady. "I'm saying you were right." The simplicity of it disarmed her. He continued, "If I were in your place, I would choose her too." Zuri swallowed. There in the dark, with the wall between worlds still standing, she saw more clearly than before why the old Zuri had loved Tendai. Not because he was charming, not because he was rich, because when truth was placed in his hands, he did not twist it to flatter himself. That made what came next even harder. "If I call this number," she said, looking down at the paper, "there is no going back. There was no going back from the day I fell at your door." She hated that he was right. From inside the house, Amina stirred and murmured in sleep. Zuri glanced back toward her mat. When she turned again, Ekon was watching the room beyond her shoulder, not with curiosity, but with a father's ache. Then he spoke the words that changed something she had been fighting with all her strength. "I don't want to ruin your life again," he said. "So if you tell me to disappear for good, I will." Zuri stared at him. That was the test. Not whether he loved her, not whether he was really Tendai, not whether destiny had dragged him back across 5 years of lies. The test was whether, when finally given a choice, he would put his need above their safety. And he had just handed the choice to her. For a long moment, all she could hear was her own heartbeat. Then against instinct, against fear, against every scar that told her never to trust what might abandon her again, she made the decision that would bind all of them to the next storm. "Don't go," she whispered. Ekon went still. Zuri tightened her grip on the paper. "But from now on, you do exactly what I say when it concerns Amina." His answer came immediately. "I will. And if this brings danger to my door, I'll stand in front of it." She looked at him a long second, searching for weakness, ego, hesitation. She found none. Only a man willing at last to stop being lost. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we call Imani. And somewhere across the city in an office lit too late for honest business, Jabari received a quiet message from one of his watchers. Possible confirmation. East District. Female and child involved." He read it once, then smiled, because now he knew exactly where to strike. Zuri made the call at dawn, not from her house, not from Mama Saad's corner stall, not from anywhere a curious eye could easily connect to her. She walked 3 streets over to a kiosk near the bus depot where people paid cash to use a public phone beneath a faded umbrella patched with tape. The owner barely looked at faces as long as coins landed in his palm. That morning the city was already sweating. Buses groaned at the curb. Hawkers shouted over one another. Fried dough hissed in black oil. Dust clung to ankles. Ordinary life pressed forward with its usual indifference, and that more than anything made Zuri's fear feel lonely. Ekon stood half-hidden behind a stack of plastic crates across the road. Cap pulled low, watching everything without appearing to. He had insisted on coming, but staying distant. Mama Sade remained closer, pretending to argue over cassava prices, while actually keeping an eye on the lane. Amina, still sleepy, clung to Zuri's skirt. "Can I have sugar bread?" after she whispered. "If you stay quiet," Zuri replied. The child nodded solemnly, as if silence were a profession she had just entered. Zuri unfolded the small scrap of paper Ekon had handed her the night before. The number was written carefully, though his memory had dragged it back through pain. She fed coins into the phone. Dialed. For a long moment, nothing happened but ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. Then a woman answered, voice clipped and cautious. "Yes," Zuri swallowed. "I need to speak to Imani Ndlovu, who is calling. My name does not matter. Then neither does mine. This line is not for games." Zuri looked across the street toward Ekon. He was staring at her without moving. She lowered her voice. "Tell her someone used to call him Tendai when the room was safe, and Ekon when it was not." Silence. Not ordinary silence. Shocked silence. The woman on the other end came back differently now, more awake, more dangerous. "Where did you hear that?" "From the man himself." Another silence, shorter this time. "Then impossible. That is what I thought too. Put him on." "No. Then this conversation ends." Zuri closed her eyes for 1 second. "If it ends, you may lose him again." That landed. When the woman spoke again, her tone had changed entirely. "Where are you?" "I'm not stupid." "Good. Then listen carefully." Paper rustled on her side. "There is a church clinic near the old rail yard. Behind it, a storage office with blue doors. 11 o'clock. Come only if you are certain. If I see anyone following you, I leave." The line clicked dead. Zuri hung up slowly. Across the road, Ekon read the answer in her face before she crossed back. "She agreed," he said. "At 11. Mama Sade muttered. "And if it is a trap, then we will know soon enough," Zuri said. The hours before 11 moved like thick water. They returned by separate routes. Ekon stayed hidden in the laundry shed room until it was time. Zuri packed a cloth bag with water bread and the little toy car Amina refused to leave behind. Mama Sade grumbled that all plans involving rich men ended with police or funerals, but she still came. At 10:30 they left. The old rail yard sat on the edge of the industrial quarter, where rusted warehouses and abandoned containers stood like bones of a dead economy. The church clinic beside it served people who had nowhere else to go. Day laborers, injured porters, mothers with coughing babies, men too poor to collapse in respectable places. The blue-doored storage office was at the back, almost hidden by stacked sacks of donated flour. Imani was already there. She stood in a cream blouse and dark skirt, arms crossed back straight every line of her posture, saying she trusted nothing she could not verify. She looked older than the version Ekon remembered in fragments, but sharper too, carved by weeks of anger and too little sleep. Her eyes found Zuri first, then Amina, then Ekon. For a moment, nobody moved. Imani's face emptied of all expression. "Dear God," she said quietly. Ekon took 1 step forward. "Imani." She flinched as if the sound itself carried a ghost. Then she crossed the space in 3 hard strides and stopped close enough to search his face, not touching him yet, as though she feared he would vanish if she blinked. "Say something only he would know." He pressed a hand to his temple. "You once told me my signature was arrogant." Imani stared. He went on, voice rough with effort. "You said the long line under the T looked like a man underlining his own importance. For the first time, emotion cracked across her composure. "That was in Johannesburg," she whispered, "in the airport lounge. No one was there. I remember pieces." She grabbed his shoulders then, not gently. "Where have you been?" His answer came with shame. "Lost." Imani let him go and turned away sharply, collecting herself. Zuri watched all this with a strange ache. Here was proof from outside her pain. Another witness, another person whose face changed in the presence of impossible truth. Ekon was who he said he was, or rather who memory was dragging him back toward. Imani faced them again. "We don't have much time. Jabari has people everywhere." Mama Sadeh snorted. "Yes, we have noticed." Imani glanced at her, then at Zuri. "Who knows?" "Only us," Zuri said. "And one neighbor who can keep secrets better than priests," Mama Sadeh added. Imani accepted that with the minimal patience of a woman who had learned crisis leaves no room for ideal allies. She turned to Ekon. "Can you remember what happened the night you disappeared?" "Some of it." "Say it," he told her. Not beautifully, not in full. Fragment by fragment, the argument with Jabari. The disputed accounts, the message drawing him to the back access road. The attack, the theft of his documents. Jabari's voice, the intention to erase him. Imani listened without interruption, though once her jaw flexed so hard, Zuri thought she might crack a tooth. When he finished, she opened her leather folder and spread papers across the metal desk inside the storage room. "Then my instincts were right," she said. "He moved faster after you vanished than anyone grieving or concerned should have. There were transfer records, internal memos, copies of authorization requests. A timeline. Even Zuri, who had no love for corporate paper, could see the pattern. The money had shifted in unnatural waves. Projects Tendai had protected were starved. Shell contracts appeared. Board influence consolidated. Imani tapped one sheet. 3 holding accounts drained within 9 days of your disappearance. Another. Security footage, archived and restricted under direct executive instruction. Another. Community health funds reclassified. Ekon looked at the pages with growing cold fury. He was stripping the company. "He is still trying," Imani corrected. "A major shareholder meeting is in 2 days. He intends to formalize permanent control." Amina, who had been quietly pushing her toy car along the floor, looked up. "What does that mean?" No one answered quickly. Mama Sadeh finally said, "It means a greedy man wants to sit in a chair that isn't his." Amina considered that. "Then tell him to stand up." For one brief second, even Imani almost smiled. Then, serious again, she looked at Zuri. "How public are you willing to become?" The question hit harder than Zuri expected. For years, survival had meant shrinking, avoiding notice, burying disgrace under routine. Feeding Amina, paying rent late, swallowing insult, staying alive. Public meant exposure. Exposure meant danger. But it also meant truth. "What do you need from me?" Zuri asked. Imani held her gaze. "Jabari destroyed you privately because private suffering is easy to dismiss. If we confront him, your voice may be the piece that turns scandal into moral collapse." Ekon turned sharply. "No." Everyone looked at him. He faced Imani. "You are not putting her in front unless there is no other choice." Zuri's temper flashed instantly. "Do not speak as if I'm furniture. That's not what I— You don't decide when I risk myself. I'm trying to protect you." She laughed harshly. "That sentence has ruined many women." Silence. Imani watched them both, assessing not just facts now, but wounds. Finally, she said, "He's right about one thing. Not because you are weak. Because Jabari will attack you first. Smear, humiliate, twist, threaten. Men like him always choose the softer target in public because they mistake softness for fragility, Mama Sade muttered. And because they are cowards. Ekon's eyes stayed on Zuri. Let me go back first. To the company, Imani asked. Yes, you'll be intercepted. Not if I choose the place. And if your memory fails halfway through. Ekon didn't answer immediately. That was the fear at the center of all this. He had truth, but not all of it. Enough to accuse. Perhaps not enough yet to win. Amina rolled the little car toward his shoe. It bumped the leather and stopped. He looked down. Then the child said, Maybe the missing part is hiding. Everyone went quiet. Amina pointed at the papers. Like when I lose my pencil. Mama says stop looking at where it isn't, and look at where you forgot to look. Imani blinked. What security material do we have besides archived footage? Ekon asked suddenly. She frowned. Very little. Think, camera logs, access records, vehicle entries, deleted drive requests. Her expression changed. Wait. She flipped rapidly through the folder and pulled out a maintenance report. The cameras at the back access road glitched for 4 minutes, she said. But not the motion trigger logs. The system still records environmental wake cycles when feeds fail. Ekon looked at her. Meaning. If a vehicle idled in that blind zone, the system may have logged repeated motion activation even without usable video. Kwesi. The security supervisor flashed in Ekon's mind, then stocky limping slightly decent enough to look ashamed when lying. He'll know, Ekon said. Kwesi. Imani nodded slowly. If anyone still has the unclean memory of that night, it's him. Zuri looked between them. Can he be trusted? Imani's answer was honest. I don't know. But fear makes men remember selectively. Sometimes all it takes is proof that they are no longer alone. Outside, a truck rattled past the clinic. Everyone went silent until the sound faded. Then Mama Sade hissed, We have visitors. Through the cracked side window, Zuri saw 2 men near the clinic gate pretending to argue with a nurse while scanning the yard with their eyes. Not locals. Dark jackets, hard posture. The same kind of watchfulness she had already learned to hate. Imani moved instantly, gathering papers. Jabari's men. How? Zuri whispered. They monitor old lines, old offices, old loyalties, Imani said. We leave separately. Now. Amina grabbed her toy car. Mama Sade tucked documents inside her wrapper. Ekon stepped toward the door, already calculating distance and exits. Then Zuri saw something on the floor near the desk, a child's drawing paper she had used to keep Amina occupied while waiting. On it in crayon, Amina had drawn 4 figures holding hands beneath a crooked roof. Herself, Zuri, Ekon, and a woman in glasses who had to be Imani. At the top, in uneven letters, she had written, My family and the helper lady. Zuri snatched up the drawing and shoved it into her bag, just as voices sounded closer outside. For a fraction of a second, fear vanished under something fiercer. Not panic. Resolve. Because Jabari's men were no longer circling a scandal. They were circling a family that had just started finding its shape. And that changed everything. As they slipped out through the rear passage behind the flour sacks, Imani spoke without turning back. Tonight, she said, I find Kwesi. Ekon replied, voice low and iron steady. And I remember enough to finish this. Behind them, the first of Jabari's watchers stepped into the blue-doored office and found nothing but the echo of people who had moved 1 minute too soon. By the morning of the shareholder meeting, the city felt sharpened by expectation. Cars lined the wide avenue outside Okoye Holdings. Security barriers had been polished. Floral arrangements stood in the lobby like expensive lies. Journalists clustered behind velvet ropes with cameras ready because rumors had been leaking for days now. Executive instability, missing funds. Internal conflict, a suspended legal counsel whispers of a vanished CEO who might not be as vanished as the board claimed. Inside, Jabari wore confidence like custom tailoring. He stood before the mirror in his private office and adjusted his cufflinks with precise fingers. His navy suit was impeccable. His tie sober enough to suggest seriousness, expensive enough to suggest inevitability. On the glass table behind him lay the day's agenda already marked at the line he intended to turn into history. Ratification of interim executive authority. Interim. Still that word, but by noon he planned to make it permanent. Mandla entered without knocking. The perimeter is secure. Jabari did not turn. And the East District problem. No verified movement since yesterday. That is not the same as resolved. No. Jabari finally faced him. Then I will explain something once. If Tendai walks into that building today, every coward on that board will rediscover morality in 5 seconds. Do you understand? Mandla nodded. Good. Then fail me only if you are tired of breathing comfortably. When the fixer left, Jabari picked up his phone and glanced at one final message from a loyal board member. Most are with you. A few uneasy. Imani rumored to be stirring trouble. He smiled faintly. Imani had always mistaken law for spine. Today she would learn what power did to principle when enough money surrounded it. Down on the 31st floor, the boardroom filled slowly. Investors took their seats. Directors whispered behind tablets. Senior managers entered with controlled faces, though tension moved through the room like a second climate. At the back, the press pool arranged lenses and notepads. This was unusual for an internal corporate vote, but Jabari had allowed limited media presence. He wanted a witness for his triumph. At the far end of the corridor outside, Imani stood near a service door with Kwesi beside her. The security supervisor looked as if he had not slept in 2 nights. You're certain? Imani asked quietly. Kwesi wiped a damp palm against his trousers. As certain as a man can be when fear has been sitting on his chest for weeks. That won't be enough in there. He looked away. I know. Imani held out a slim flash drive. The logs are copied. The motion triggers. Vehicle entry anomalies. Archive restrictions. The access override issued from Jabari's office the night Tendai disappeared. Her gaze hardened. But if you go silent when they pressure you, all of this becomes paperwork instead of truth. Kwesi swallowed. And if I speak, then at least one person in that room may leave with his soul intact. He gave a grim little laugh. You lawyers always make courage sound expensive. It is. At the same time, 3 floors below, in a secured restroom, kept temporarily empty by a sympathetic facilities manager. Zuri stood facing Ekon. He was no longer dressed like a beggar. Not fully. The suit Imani had arranged was not perfect. Slightly broad at the shoulders, a half-inch short at the wrist, but it transformed him enough to make the past feel painfully visible. His beard had been trimmed. The bruising remained faded, but real. The scar at his temple showed faintly near the hairline. He looked like a man dragged back from disaster before anyone had agreed whether he was allowed to return. Amina stood between them in her clean blue dress, holding the lion keychain in one fist like a blessing. You look like the picture, she told him. Ekon knelt before her. Do I? She nodded, but more tired. That nearly made Zuri laugh and almost broke her heart in the same moment. Imani stepped in from the corridor. It's time. Amina instantly clung to Zuri's skirt. The child had been told she would stay with Mama Sade in a side office once the meeting began, far from the cameras and shouting. She had accepted this only after extracting 2 promises that no one would leave without telling her and that Ekon would not disappear. He gave the second promise now. I will come back for you. She searched his face, then offered him the keychain. Take it. Zuri opened her mouth, but Ekon accepted it carefully. When his fingers closed around the tiny silver lion, something flickered across his face again. Another memory, another returning shard. "Thank you," he whispered. Amina looked at him with grave approval. "It helps people remember love." Then Mama Sade, who had absolutely no intention of missing history, swept in and took the child's hand. "Come, little judge. Let fools ruin themselves in peace." She led Amina away. For 1 second, Zuri and Ekon were alone. The building hummed around them. Elevators, air conditioning, wealth arranged into quiet machinery. Zuri stared at him. "Once you walk in there, there is no hiding anymore." "I know. If Jabari turns this into dirt, if they drag my name through every mouth in the city, I will answer it publicly." She stepped closer, eyes bright with anger and fear held tightly together. "Do not answer for me. Stand with me." "That is different." Something like pain and admiration crossed his face at once. "Yes," he said. "With you." Imani reappeared. "Now." The boardroom doors closed with the soft heaviness of money. Jabari stood at the head of the long table, one hand on the chairback, voice smooth as oil. "As we proceed," he said, "let us remember that leadership is not sentiment. It is continuity. In moments of uncertainty, institutions survive because responsible people act." The doors opened. It was not loud. That was what made everyone turn. A security aide stepped in first, visibly unsettled. Then Imani. Then Kwesi. And behind them, walking with a measured calm that made the room forget how to breathe, came Ekon Tendai, alive, upright, unmistakable. Jabari's sentence died in his throat. The room erupted before sound did. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped openly. One investor swore under his breath. Cameras snapped to attention. The chairman half rose, then dropped back down as if his bones had lost instructions. Ekon stopped at the far end of the table. He did not smile. He did not rush. He let recognition spread like fire in dry grass. "Tendai," the chairman whispered. Jabari recovered first, though only barely. "This is absurd." Ekon's gaze moved to him. Cold, direct, familiar in a way that turned Jabari's composure thin. "No," he said. "This is overdue." The press began firing questions at once, but Imani cut through them. "Before anyone speaks over the truth, let the record show that Tendai Okoye is present, conscious, and prepared to contest all actions taken under the pretense of his incapacity or disappearance." Jabari laughed once, sharp and brittle. "Prepared by whom? A suspended lawyer and a man who wanders in after weeks looking like a street ghost." Ekon took another step forward. "A ghost would have been easier for you." That landed. Jabari's eyes hardened. "You are not well. I was made unwell. Can you prove that Imani set the flash drive on the table? We can begin." Screens changed, logs appeared, motion triggers from the blind access road, archive restrictions, override orders authorized through Jabari's office, vehicle entries tied to a holding company under his private control. Timestamps arranged into a pattern so ugly even cowards could read it. A director leaned forward, face blanching. "What is this?" Kwesi spoke then, voice shaking at first, then strengthening as truth forced air into him. "It's the night Mr. Okoye disappeared," he said. "The video feed cut, but the motion logs did not. A vehicle idled in the blind zone. Afterward, I received instruction to archive the footage and restrict access. The authorization came through executive override." He looked directly at Jabari now. From his office. Jabari turned on him instantly. "Do you understand the legal consequences of fabrication?" Kwesi swallowed. "Do you understand the moral consequences of silence?" For the first time, murmurs in the room sounded less like shock and more like changing allegiance. Jabari saw it too. So he changed tactics. This proves nothing except procedural confusion during a family emergency, he said. And even if Tendai was attacked, none of this links me personally. That was when Zuri entered. Not hidden, not dragged, walking. Every eye turned again. She wore no wealth, no corporate polish, no protective disguise. Just a clean dress, braided hair, and the kind of stillness women earn after surviving humiliation too long to fear it properly anymore. Jabari's face changed. Not much, but enough. Imani spoke first. This is Zuri Adeyemi. The surname was invented for paperwork years ago when landlords asked too many questions. It did not matter. Jabari stared at her with the old contempt fighting desperately against new panic. Zuri looked straight back. You remember me? No one in the room made a sound. Jabari smiled faintly, trying for scorn. Should I? Yes, she said. Because 5 years ago you told me I should be grateful. Rich families clean up their mistakes quietly. Several heads turned sharply toward him. Zuri kept going. You came to the gate after Tendai vanished. You told me he was ashamed of me, that he had chosen a better woman. You said if I was carrying anything of his, I should raise it alone because it would be the only thing I ever got from your family. The room shifted under the weight of that. Jabari spread his hands. A convenient story. Zuri's voice did not rise. It sharpened. No, a practiced cruelty. He scoffed. And who are you supposed to be? A tragic witness rolled out for theatre. Ekon moved then just one pace, but it was enough to draw every lens back to him. She is the woman you destroyed because humiliating her was easier than facing me. His voice carried across the room with terrifying clarity. And she is the mother of my daughter. The words detonated. The press shouted all at once. Investors erupted. Directors began speaking over one another. The chairman banged uselessly for order. Jabari's control cracked visibly now. This is madness. A setup. An attempt to extort. Enough, Ekon said. And because the authority in him had fully returned, the room obeyed. He faced the board. Look at him carefully, he said. Not as family. Not as interim leadership. As a man who profited from my absence, stripped programs I built. Silenced legal counsel, buried security evidence, and helped erase the mother of my child because she was poor enough to be treated as disposable. Then he turned back to Jabari. You did not just steal from a company. You stole 5 years from a woman who had done nothing except trust the wrong bloodline. You stole a father from a child before she had words for the loss, and you thought money would launder all of it. Jabari lunged for dignity and found only rage. You always were weak, he spat. That was your problem. You chose slums and sentiment over power. Ekon's face went still. That stillness was worse than fury. No, he said. I chose humanity. You mistook that for weakness because men like you cannot imagine power without cruelty. A voice broke in from the side. It was the chairman, old frightened, but finally reading the room correctly. Security, he said hoarsely. Do not let Mr. Jabari Okoye leave. Jabari turned in disbelief. You spineless old fool! But the tide had already moved. Security guards stepped forward this time, not following his office. Behind the glass, cameras flashed like judgment. And in the middle of the chaos, Zuri stood absolutely still. Because after 5 years of being spoken about, dismissed, lied over, and erased the truth, had finally entered a room too rich to ignore her. The city did not become kind after the truth came out. That was the first lesson healing taught them. By evening, every radio host with a dramatic voice was repeating some version of the scandal. Social media accounts tore the story into pieces and fed on it. Some people called Zuri brave, some called her strategic, some called her a liar who had waited 5 years for a wealthy opening. Strangers argued over her pain like it belonged to the public now. Jabari was taken in for questioning before sunset, along with 2 associates linked to the false archive orders and the vehicle records from the night Tendai disappeared. Lawyers swarmed, investors panicked, journalists camped outside Okoye Holdings like scavengers waiting for fresh blood. Justice had begun. But justice, Zuri learned quickly, was not the same as peace. That night, Tendai did not return to the penthouse apartment the board offered to secure for him. He returned to the narrow workers' quarter, to the leaking roof, to the peeling wall, to the house where his daughter slept with one arm around a cloth doll and one shoe half kicked off the bed. Mama Sade saw him from her doorway and folded her arms at once. So the king has come back to the village. Tendai almost smiled. Something like that. She sniffed. Don't walk around here like cameras will save you. Men with money are dangerous when cornered. I know. Do you? She asked sharply. Because that woman inside has survived long enough without being turned into a symbol. His face sobered completely. I know. Mama Sade studied him for a long second, then stepped aside from her own doorway, as though granting passage in a kingdom of cracked cement and fish smoke. Good, she said. Then prove it with time, not speeches. Inside the house, Zuri was folding laundry. Not because there was much to fold, because her hands needed work, while her mind battled too many new realities at once. Tendai stood near the entrance, suddenly uncertain in a room where he had once lain nameless on the floor as a beggar. Amina saw him first. She came running in barefoot hair, half undone from sleep, and launched herself against his legs with total confidence. You came back! The words nearly destroyed him. He crouched at once and gathered her carefully into his arms, as if the child might vanish if held too tightly. I told you I would. Amina touched his cheek with both hands, studying him. You look sad. He let out a slow breath. A little. Because of bad people. Yes, she nodded as though bad people were weather, real, recurring, survivable. Then she brightened. Mama made bean stew. For one strange second, Tendai almost laughed. The child had just watched a corporate empire tremble, a villain dragged toward ruin, and her greatest immediate truth was bean stew. Maybe that was grace. He stood with her in his arms and looked toward Zuri. She had stopped folding but had not moved closer. You don't have to stay here tonight, she said. It was not cold, not warm either, just careful. I know, he answered. But I wanted to come back. Amina twisted in his arms. He should stay. Zuri looked at her daughter, then away. Children made simple demands because they were not yet old enough to understand how broken adults could be, even when truth was finally on their side. After dinner, Mama Saad took Amina outside for a few minutes under the excuse of showing her a neighbor's new kittens. It was an obvious act of mercy giving the adults space none of them knew how to ask for. Silence settled in the room. Tendai looked at the stool, then at Zuri. May I sit? She almost said, It's your company, but still my stool, but the bitterness died before reaching her mouth. Yes. He sat. For a moment, both stared at the cooling stove. Finally, he said, The board wants me back immediately. And I told them no. That made her turn. He continued, Not no forever, no immediately. Why? Because I have spent years building things that made me respected by strangers, while the people who should have had me had nothing. He met her eyes. I'm not starting again by choosing absence. Zuri held his gaze. It would have been easier in some ways if he had returned to polished floors and delegated family feeling into neat visits. Easier to hate, easier to distrust. Harder to hope. Words are easy, she said at last. Yes, you used to make beautiful ones. Pain flickered across his face. Then I'll use actions now. That answer lingered. Outside, Amina's laugh floated in from the alley. Mama Sadeh was telling some outrageous story in a voice too loud to be casual. Zuri sat opposite him. "There is something you need to understand," she said. "Today did not heal me." "I know, no," she said quietly. "Listen, today gave me truth. It gave me justice starting to move. It gave my daughter a father back from the dead. But it did not erase the years. It did not erase labor pains in a clinic where nobody cared if I screamed. It did not erase hunger, or insults, or the way I taught myself not to wait at the door for footsteps that never came." Tendai did not look away. "I would never ask it to erase those things," he said. "Good," she replied, "because if you come back into this house, expecting gratitude to do the work of rebuilding trust, you will fail." His answer was immediate. "Then I will rebuild it slowly." She believed that he meant it. Believing he meant it was not the same as being ready, but it was more than she had yesterday. The following weeks were not dramatic in the way stories liked to be dramatic. No music swelled. No miraculous shortcut arrived. Healing did not come dressed like triumph. It came wearing patience. Tendai rented a modest house 2 streets away, first not forcing himself into Zuri's home every hour, simply because blood and truth gave him that right. He spent mornings at the company with Imani and forensic auditors, undoing Jabari's quiet thefts 1 ledger at a time. He restored the health fund, reopened the scholarship program, reversed layoffs where he could, suspended contracts tied to shell firms, replaced frightened yes-men with people who had once been pushed aside for asking questions. By noon he came to Zuri's neighborhood, not always with gifts, sometimes with bread, sometimes with school books, sometimes with nothing but time. He learned that Amina hated boiled okra, but loved oranges, that she liked stories with brave girls and foolish hyenas, that she asked hard questions when sleepy and impossible ones when fully awake, that she had a habit of slipping her hand into his whenever she sensed a crowd, as if some lost part of her had decided that found fathers should not be trusted to remain found without supervision. He let her supervise. He learned how to braid badly under Zuri's ruthless correction. He learned how to sit through a school meeting on reading progress without looking at his phone once. He learned how much silence lived inside the spaces he had missed. One afternoon, while helping Amina write her name in careful letters, he found himself staring at her small fingers and thinking, "She had a fever once and I was not there. She learned to walk and I was not there. She cried in the night and I was not there." The grief of fatherhood arrived not only as joy, it arrived as inventory. Zuri saw that grief in him. She did not soothe it. Some pains should not be comforted too quickly. They should teach. But she also noticed he never turned that grief into self-pity. He did not ask her to reassure him. He did not demand forgiveness because regret hurt. He simply kept showing up. That mattered. By the 2nd month, the city's hunger for scandal had begun to move on to fresher meat. Jabari's case deepened. 2 former employees turned state witnesses. Kwesi testified fully. Mandla tried to disappear and failed. The company's board publicly apologized to Zuri in language polished enough to be almost insulting. She declined the private settlement they first offered. Then, after consulting, Imani accepted one on her own terms, a housing trust for single mothers abandoned during pregnancy, legal aid funding for low-income women facing coercion by powerful families, and a scholarship foundation established in Amina's name. When the papers were signed, Imani looked at her over the file and said, "That is more powerful than taking money and vanishing." Zuri answered, "That is because I was trained by humiliation. It made me efficient." Imani laughed for the first time without restraint. Months later, on a bright Sunday afternoon, Tendai stood in the doorway of Zuri's house, holding a small wooden toolbox and looking offended. "This shelf is crooked," he said. "It has been crooked longer than your memory," Zuri replied. "Which is why it deserves better." Amina, seated cross-legged on the floor with crayons, looked up. "Everything deserves better when Daddy sees it." The word still sometimes startled the room, not because it felt wrong anymore, because it had once felt impossible. Tendai fixed the shelf, then the leaking tap, then the loose hinge on the window, not because they could not afford workers now, because repairing visible damage with his own hands had become for him a form of prayer. When he finished, he turned and found Zuri watching him, not with the old, easy laughter from the market years, not with full surrender either, something slower, stronger, chosen. He crossed the room carefully, respecting the invisible places where her wounds still required space. "There's something I want to ask," he said. Her brow lifted. "Should I prepare to be irritated?" "Possibly." That earned the smallest smile. He took out a key. Not gold, not ornate, just a house key on a plain ring. "The place I rented," he said. "It isn't far. I told myself I would wait until you were ready even to consider this. So this is not pressure." He held the key between them. "I want it to be a home for all three of us someday, but only when it feels earned. Until then, I wanted you to decide whether you even want to keep a copy." Zuri stared at the key. Years ago, promises had come wrapped in confidence. This one came wrapped in humility. That was different. Amina popped up from the floor immediately. "Say yes." Both adults looked at her. She threw up her hands. "What, I live here too." Mama Sadeh, who had entered without knocking because some things in life were fixed, barked a laugh from the doorway. Zuri took the key. Not dramatically, not as a final answer to everything. Simply took it. And Tendai, because he had finally learned what love after ruin required, did not ask what it meant beyond that. That evening, they sat outside together as the sky turned orange over the neighborhood roofs. Amina dozed with her head in Zuri's lap and one foot across Tendai's thigh. Children shouted somewhere farther down the alley. A woman sang while washing clothes. Someone burned maize nearby. The world was ordinary, beautifully quietly ordinary. Tendai looked at the small house before them, the place where he had arrived, nameless, broken, and nearly too late. "I thought home would be the place I built with money," he said softly. Zuri looked at him, then at their sleeping daughter. "No," she answered. "Home is the place where the truth is finally allowed to stay." He reached for her hand. This time she let him hold it, not because the pain was gone, because trust after everything had begun to return one honest day at a time. And in that narrow street, under a fading African sky, a mother, a father, and a 5-year-old girl sat close together, not as a miracle untouched by suffering, but as something more powerful, a family reamed by truth, responsibility, justice, and the long courage to heal.